Well, hello and welcome to Movement Church Online. I'm Chris. I'm the lead pastor here at Movement. I'm so glad and honored that you would make the decision to join us from your place to our place. So glad that you're taking some time to spend your day with us. And if you have ever wondered the place that politics has in the Christian faith, well, let me tell you what, today is for you. And on top of that, today we're in a standalone message called Servants and Systems, and I've got what I believe is an incredibly strong message, a strong challenge and encouragement for all of us as we're in the middle of an election year here in 2022. So if you know someone who's particularly politically minded and is trying to figure out how their politics could actually work with their faith, I want to encourage you to share this message with them. I believe it has the power to really change some things in our world and move us forward as our faith could inform our politics. So we're going to jump right in today at the beginning. We're going to jump right in to servants and systems. Let's go. Well, today as we jump in, I first of all want to give a small book recommendation for a book that I think is really valuable in this discussion of faith and politics and how they intersect, how our faith, our Christian faith intersects with politics. The book is called Not In It to Win It. It's by Andy Stanley. I know, surprise, surprise, I would recommend a book by Andy Stanley. In fact, when I read this book, I was tempted to take it's so strong, I was tempted to take the core idea of this book and make it the core idea of today's message, but I really felt compelled to stick to the idea for today that I was drawn to back a few months back. But the core idea of the book is that as Jesus followers in America, we are not in it to win America. We are in it to win Americans to Jesus. We are not primarily in it to win America. We are in it to win Americans to Jesus. In other words, as Christians, we are not called to wage and win a culture war. We are called to lead and draw people to Jesus with our love in action and our proclamation of the good news and the new life of Jesus Christ. And if we ever get confused about the two, if we ever confuse the two, we have missed the boat and we have missed the point of what Jesus ultimately commanded us and called us to. It's a strong book when it comes to the idea and an approach to the intersection of our faith and our politics. But that is not the message today. That is not the message today as we talk about faith and politics. Since we started as a church in 2016, I have used this particular Sunday 3 times to tackle some hot button issues and give us a Jesus lens with which to view things that have happened from the election in 2016 to a lot of conflict issues in 2018, border issues, gun and violence issues are still happening today. And of course, all of the craziness of 2020 from the handling of COVID to systemic racism and racial protests to an election that still has people talking about it nearly 2 years after it happened. And if I wanted to take that approach today, we certainly have enough hot button issues to hit over the last 2 years or a year or 6 months or 3 months or 1 month or like 1 week. Like we have plenty to talk about, to spend a whole day talking about a Jesus lens through which to view the events happening in our state, in our country, and our world, and how we should respond as Christ followers as the events happening around us. Just this year alone, just in the last 6 months, as I'm standing here today recording, we're not quite to the end of June, but we will be to the end of June by Sunday. As just the first 6 months of this year, how should we respond to mega inflation, to marijuana legalization in our state, to trucker protests in another country that our country got wildly obsessed about, to a nation at war with another international superpower, but we won't really admit it? How should we respond to record high gas prices, to mass shootings, the January 6th hearings, and a very active and controversial super court? And oh, by the way, it is an election year. And so it wouldn't be hard for me to stand up here and give my answers or give what I believe would be Christian answers and Christian responses for how you're supposed to react to what is happening around us. But if we are all honest, you are already being told constantly how you are supposed to feel and respond to what's happening around you. As if the 24-hour cable news and now the offshoot, more extreme cable news stations weren't enough telling you how to feel and respond to everything. Now we have YouTubers and podcasters and TikTok influencers shaping our opinion and our emotional and very real responses to every single event happening around us. And if that wasn't enough, we have the ever-present, in your pocket and in your hand and on-demand dominance of social media, where everyone you know and plenty of people that you don't know have opinions on everything and have opinions about your opinion about everything that happens. And if you don't have an opinion, they have an opinion about that. So we are constantly being told how we should respond and how we should respond and how we should respond and what opinion we should have and what opinions we should have. But back in January, as I was preparing and praying and planning out this year, I really felt led by God to take a different path for this message. And rather than talking about how to feel about what is happening, I felt like I saw something in Scripture that should influence who we cast our votes for and what we expect and require from those who hold our public offices. So rather than feeling led to talk about, how to feel about what is happening, I want to talk today about who we cast our votes for and what we expect from the people we cast our votes for. And if that makes you nervous that I'm going to tell you today who to vote for across state elections this year or national elections in the future, I am not going to name any names at all because I don't play those games. I don't play those games where I talk about people's names. I don't do that. But I hope the story that we're going to look at today and the principle found here will shape the way we think about the names we'll cast votes for both this year and for the rest of our lives. Let's jump into Scripture. There's a fascinating story found in the Old Testament about a young man who grew to immense power and influence in the most powerful nation in the world. His name was Joseph. Now, important to note in case you're not real familiar with Bible study, this is not Joseph, the father of Jesus. This is a Joseph who lived about 1,500 years before the father of Jesus would walk the earth. This is Old Testament Joseph. Joseph was the 11th of 12 sons of one father and multiple mothers. Dysfunctional family. He grew up in a rather dysfunctional home as the favorite son of his father. And when you're the favorite son of 12 brothers, the other 11 brothers don't take a real liking to you. And Joseph's brothers were no different, except they got a little more extreme with it. They hatched and executed a plan to get rid of their brother. And eventually they captured and sold Joseph as a slave. Now, as a slave, Joseph ends up in Egypt, where he starts to make a name for himself because of his hard work and his diligence, only to be falsely accused of sexual assault by a powerful woman in a powerful household. So Joseph goes from slave to prisoner. Things actually went downhill from slave for Joseph. It's wild stuff, and it's a wild story. Now, we don't know exactly how long Joseph was in prison, but during the time that he was in prison, he meets two officials of Pharaoh who have been imprisoned pending Pharaoh's investigation into his baker and his cupbearer. After Joseph correctly interprets their individual dreams, the cupbearer is restored to his position and the baker is executed. It's a bloody story. He's executed. Joseph tells the cupbearer as he's leaving, as he's about to be restored to his position, hey, don't forget me in here. I'm falsely accused. Remember what I've done for you. Remember the talent that I have. Remember the ability that I have for you. And the guy's like, yeah, I promise. I won't forget you, bro. And then immediately forgets him, bro. As soon as he's out, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to bring up that time that I was in prison. So 2 years go by, and the dude completely forgot Joseph until Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret. You may be familiar with this story. Pharaoh has a dream, no one can interpret it, and then the cupbearer remembers this guy that he met in prison who had a knack for interpreting dreams. I don't know why, but this actually reminds me of a villain's origin story in a Marvel movie. Hey, let's go get that guy in prison who was able to interpret dreams. Let's bring him before the most powerful man in the world. It sounds like the beginning of a Marvel movie where something terrible is going to happen as soon as this guy from the prison who can interpret dreams gets in front of Pharaoh. But instead of something terrible happening, here's what happens. They call for Joseph. They clean him up to be presented to Pharaoh. And when he gets in front of Pharaoh, he interprets Pharaoh's dream while giving credit to God for giving him the interpretation. And then, unsolicited, this guy who just got out of a prison cell is probably still standing in shackles. Unsolicited, he gives a comprehensive plan for what should be done in response to the dream and its meaning. Now, the dream and its meaning was that there would be 7 incredibly fertile and productive years for the nation of Egypt that would be immediately followed by 7 years of intense drought and famine. Literally 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of immense scarcity. To put this into modern economic terms, this would be 7 years of budget surplus followed by 7 years of immense taxable income shortfall. This would be like 7 years of like, we have more than enough to do. We're paying down the national debt, and 7 years of like, oh my gosh, we're exploding the national debt, and we're like, and we don't have enough to cover what we need to cover. So, and Pharaoh, he hears the interpretation and he hears Joseph's announced plan. And after he hears Joseph's announced plan, he says, you're the guy to implement and execute our nationwide plan to store food during the abundance for the time of scarcity. You're the guy. You who just got off the prison floor. You who's still standing in shackles. By the way, can we get the shackles off the guy? Because now he's going to be in charge. You are the guy to implement and to execute and to make the plans for our nationwide plan to store food for 7 years out of our time of abundance so that we have enough when there is a time of scarcity. Joseph, with the snap of a finger, he goes from a prison floor to being the second most powerful man in the most powerful nation in the world at that time. And if you hear that, you're like, wow, okay, well, that's okay, but what's the principle here? Like, what's the principle? Is that we should elevate prisoners to like government officials? Like, I don't think that's the point. That's not the point. If you're like, I'm not quite tracking, that's okay that you're not tracking. We actually haven't gotten to the principle yet. But notice what happens in the following verses as we're told what happened as Joseph led in Egypt during the time of abundance and what happened in the time of scarcity. Says this in Genesis chapter 47, starting in verse 13, the subheading is Joseph's leadership in the famine. Verse 13 says this, meanwhile, the famine became so severe that all the food was used up, and people were starving throughout the lands of Egypt and Canaan. By selling grain to the people, Joseph eventually collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan, and he put the money in Pharaoh's treasury. When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, all the Egyptians came to Joseph. Our money is gone, they cried, but please give us food or we will die before your very eyes. Joseph replied, since your money is gone, bring me your livestock. I will give you food in exchange for your livestock. So they brought their livestock to Joseph in exchange for food. In exchange for their horses, flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle and donkeys, Joseph provided them with food for another year. But that year ended. And the next year they came again and said, we cannot hide the truth from you, my lord. Our money is gone and all our livestock and cattle are yours. We have nothing left to give you but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We offer our land and ourselves as slaves for Pharaoh. But just give us grain so we may live and not die. And so the land does not become empty and desolate. So Joseph, verse 20, so Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was so severe, and soon all the land belonged to Pharaoh. As for the people, he made them all slaves from one end of Egypt to the other. The only land he did not buy was the land belonging to the priests. They received an allotment of food directly from Pharaoh, so they didn't need to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, look, today I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. I will provide you with seed so that you can plant the fields. That when you harvest it, 1/5 of your crop will belong to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seed for your fields and as food for you and your households and your little ones. Verse 25, you have saved our lives. You have saved our lives, they exclaimed. May it please you, my lord, to let us be Pharaoh's servants. Joseph then issued a decree, still in effect in the land of Egypt, that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown on his land. Only the land belonging to the priests was not given to Pharaoh. Now notice what happens. This is a pretty big deal. Did you catch it in verse 25? We paused, kind of made a big deal, but notice what happens. Joseph, a servant-hearted leader, in a position of influence, because of good planning and a wise mind, implements a system and a plan that leads to the saving of lives for people of an entire region. This is millions of people saved because of the system that Joseph, a servant-hearted leader, implemented. Now, fast forward a few hundred years. Fast forward a number of years, most likely a few hundred years. The famine was over and Joseph had passed away long ago. And here's what we're told as the book of Exodus opens up. Exodus chapter 1, starting in verse 8, tells us this. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country. And here's what we're told in verse 11. So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. So, here's what we notice. Here's what I saw when reading this back in January that made me sit up and pay attention. The mechanism that saved the world in the hands of one leader is the same mechanism that enslaved an entire nation in the hands of another leader. The same mechanism that allowed Joseph to save the people through exchange of goods, through exchange of land, through exchange of all kinds of stuff that brought life-saving food to an entire nation and an entire region, is the same mechanism that Pharaoh later would use to enslave an entire nation of people living within his borders. It's the same mechanism. Notice this. In the capable hands of Joseph, because of his heart to save and help people, a good system saved millions from certain death due to scarcity and hunger. Later, the very same system that Joseph had implemented in the hands of an insecure and fearful leader would bring about enslavement, humiliation, and brutal mistreatment of an entire nation, hundreds of thousands of people. And the problem was not that Pharaoh did not know how to work Joseph's system. The problem was that Pharaoh knew exactly how to work the system for his benefit, and he refused to use the system to serve those he was in a position to lead. And at the same time, so we see this polarizing thing. They both have a system. They both have the same system. But we have a great leader who serves, a great leader who wants to help people, and we have one leader who wants to control and wants to use the system to further his own power and his own kingdom. And at the same time as that, we can also see that, imagine we have Joseph's good servant's heart without the intelligence and the wisdom to implement, execute, and enforce a strong system of response of the government. It would have been chaos as well and would not have brought about life-saving food for an entire region, an entire nation of people. So here's what I noticed. You could say it this way. If you have a bad system and a bad leader, you have chaotic evil and desperation. The government can't accomplish their intentions, but that's fine because their intentions were selfish and evil anyway. If you have a bad system but a great leader, you have ineffective but compassionate. You have a government that's ineffective but compassionate. They want to do the right things and they feel bad about not being able to do the right things, but for some reason they can't seem to get the right things done. On the flip side, what we experience with Pharaoh in the time leading up to the Exodus is you have a good system, but you have a bad leader. And a good system and a bad leader means the government will be effective at all the wrong things. See, our world has seen some terrible things done by leaders with bad hearts and bad intentions who knew how to build systems to carry out the desires of their selfish and evil hearts. Our world has seen enough of that. And then what we hope for, what should be the goal, what we see at work with Joseph, is a good system and a great leader. And what that leads to is it's a life-giving government for everyone involved. It's life-giving governance for everyone involved. It's life-giving leadership for everyone involved. And so here's the thing. This is going to sound kind of fundamental. This is going to sound like, duh. This is going to sound like something that, Chris, this is kind of so basic. Of course, we all know this. But I just want to say, maybe we don't all know this. So our goal, as we go to polls and as we elect government officials, we should vote for great leaders who will implement good systems. We should vote for great leaders who will implement good systems. And again, you're going, well, duh. That's so foundational. We all know that. And I would ask us, do we? Because here's what most of us do. We have already picked a side, and whoever our side presents to us, that's who we're going to vote for, regardless of if they're a great leader, regardless of if they know how to work good systems or create good systems. We don't actually do this. We take, well, I'm a Republican, well, I'm a Democrat, and regardless of who our side puts up, we go to the polls and we vote for whoever our side puts up with little thought to, are they actually a great leader? And do they know how to build and implement and execute great systems for the benefit of people around them, the people that they will represent and the people that they will govern? We give very little thought to, are they a great leader who knows how to build and implement good systems that are for the good of everyone? We give very little thought to that. So here's the thing. Again, we say, well, we all know that, but do we? Do we actually vote this way? And as Christians, I just want to say, we have story after story after story after story in our book of faith of what happens when good systems are paired with bad leaders. And we have story after story after story of what happens when good-hearted leaders don't know what to do and don't implement good systems. This is a ton of the kings of ancient Israel. We have story after story and example after example after example of people, of what happens when either we have a leader who is not a great leader or a system that's not a good system. But we also see a couple stories from King David to King Solomon to Joseph to Jesus to the early church of what happens in the world when a great leader is paired, who knows how to build good systems, comes into influence. And when those people come into influence, it brings about life-giving leadership for the church and life-giving leadership for the world. So what if we as Christians decided we're no longer going to take our cues from a divided culture and a divided world about who we're going to vote for, but instead we're going to vote for the people who are great leaders who will build and implement great systems that are good for everyone. Now, if you're thinking about well, how do we do, what does that even look like to look past, blue and red, to look past red and blue and independent and libertarian and green and all that stuff. What does it look like to vote past your party of choice, to vote for great leaders who will build good systems? I think it has to come to two things. Number one is we look at who they are and how they lead. Who they are and how they lead. Now, I want to talk first about how they lead. See, this is one of those things that's difficult to see from a distance sometimes. This is also difficult sometimes because in terms of elections, because we don't know the people that we vote for, and sometimes the people that we're voting for have not been in the office that they are asking us to vote for them to be voted into. So when it comes to this question of how will they lead, I want to vote for good systems, which means efficient and ethical governance. Efficient and ethical governance. And to determine, to kind of project or see or how we place this in our voting mind, keep this in our mindset, I asked these three questions. These are three questions that I've been working on for the last 6 months of how can I tell if a person will lead an efficient and an ethical government. Here's the three questions that I have landed on. Does their government make efficient use of finances, or do they have a history of wasteful spending? See, here's what I know. In the state that I live in New Mexico, in the state that most of us live in, we actually rank 49th out of the 50 states for our state and the return on our taxation, meaning our tax dollars. Out of the 50 states, our state ranks 50th in most wasteful government spending. We actually tax at a pretty high rate, and then we do not have a history of using it well. So in our state, what I would hope to call our leadership to, not that they'll hear this, but maybe someone pass this along to those running for offices right now. Can we get better at using our government spending more efficiently? Can we stop wasting so much government money and use it better? Here's the second question. Are they and their operatives and their second in command and the people who are close to them, are they surrounded by controversy? Are they surrounded by controversy? Here's the thing. If we want to have an ethical government, we want to have an efficient government. If we want to have an ethical government, we have to make sure that we are electing people who are not constantly surrounded by controversy. And again, this is blue and red alike. This is in the state that we live in. So many of the people that are asking for our votes are continuously surrounded by controversy. And I would say maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop voting for people who are surrounded by controversy, because guess what happens when people who are surrounded by controversy get elected into government offices? The government offices become associated with controversy. And so I want to challenge us. Let's vote for people who are not surrounded by controversy. Let's make sure that we are voting for people who are ethical in their approach to leadership. And then the third question, I don't know exactly if this applies, but this is something that I think is important for good leadership. Do the people who are closest to them love working with them, or is there frequent and significant personnel turnover? Do people who are closest to them love working with them? Or do people get promoted and then find out, you know what, I don't really want to work with this person. Man, I got to get out. Again, if there's constant turnover, first of all, if there's constant turnover, it makes it a whole lot less efficient. Sometimes there's constant turnover because there's constant controversy and a lack of ethics. But at the end of the day, if there's constant turnover, it should make us question whether or not the people that we're voting for are actually worth voting for. Again, this is blue and red. This is across the board. This isn't a one side or the other thing. This is both sides. You can have, again, if you don't have a great leader, chances are you will have constant turnaround and constant personnel turnover, because that's what happens when there's not a great leader in charge. Are we voting for efficient and ethical governance? How they lead. Not just who they are, but how they lead. And then let's go back to who they are. Let's go back to who they are. See, when we talk about who they are, great leaders, what defines a great leader? What defines a great leader? A great leader, when it comes to government, this is how I'm defining great leader. This is what I want to see. This is who I want to vote for. Great leaders are servant-hearted, accountable, and they're for the entire governed population. They are servant-hearted, they're willing to be held accountable, and they are for the entire governed population. Let me break this down a little bit. Servant-hearted, meaning they leverage their position of authority to help others, not to help themselves. And let me take it a step further. They leverage their position of authority to serve their constituents, not to serve special interests. This is not a red or blue thing. This is a both sides thing. I would call every side to step up their service and stop the special interests, to stop serving themselves and to serve the people who are putting you into office. A great leader is servant-hearted. See, Jesus, on the last night that he spent with his disciples, he told them that you see how it is among the rulers of the world. Not so with you. Whoever would be the greatest must be the servant of all. Whoever is the greatest must be a servant to all. You want to know what makes a leader great? What makes a leader great, from government to the pastoral roles to everything that you do? What makes a great teacher? What makes a great principal? What makes a great leader of anything in this world is someone who is willing to serve those they are responsible for. Now, on this note of servant-hearted leadership, let me tell you one thing that's gotten under my skin and has. And I know they're like, oh, let me be a grumpy old man sharing my opinion. No, this matters. This is going to lead somewhere. Campaign advertising in our state, and I think it's across the nation, but I looked up the numbers for our state, and it is absolutely absurd. Let me give you a few numbers. In 2020, this is Facebook advertisements for political campaigns during the 2020 election cycle. Let me give you the three big campaigns that were waged within our state. Number one is the presidential race. For the presidential race in New Mexico, there was $570,000 spent on Facebook advertisements. For the Senate race in New Mexico, $25,000 was spent on Facebook advertising. For the Southern Congressional District race, there was $51,000 spent on Facebook advertisements. Now, I don't know how good you are at math. That adds up to $646,000 spent on Facebook ads alone. Not TV ads, not print ads, not YouTube ads, not mailers in your mailbox, which, by the way, you probably got about 7,000 every single week. Like, that doesn't even account for any of that. That's $646,000 spent just on Facebook advertisements for 3 races. And I just want to let you know, in New Mexico, $676,000 could go to do a lot of good for a lot of people, and instead it went towards winning political campaigns. And some of it went towards losing political campaigns. I mean, just by half of it went towards losing political campaigns. Let me give you the numbers in 2018 for our governor's election. for their gubernatorial election, there was $14.4 million spent on advertising in the state of New Mexico. It adds up to $20 for each vote that was cast. $14.4 million spent on advertising, about half of that by the party that lost. So I would just like to say, I want to give one ridiculous, absurd, and I know this is absurd, and I know that no political candidate will ever do this, but if one political candidate ever did this, they would have my vote for that election. Because great leaders serve. Here's what I would call our political candidates too, and I hope this gets in front of someone. Make one advertisement that doesn't come on our TVs or our phones. Here's your advertisement. Donate to organizations in our state that help the people of this state. In 2018, do you know what $14.4 million could have done for nonprofit organizations within our state that are helping to serve people in our state? $14.4 million that made us all angry and enraged every time we would see another political commercial or get another piece of political mail in our mailbox. $14.4 million that went to kind of irritate half the people, went to annoy the other half of the people, and most of it was never read, most of it was glossed over, most of it was fast forwarded through, and it was $14.4 million spent to win an election. And I just would call candidates, could we stop doing that? Show us who you are and what you care about by spending campaign money as a servant, not as an opponent. Show us how you will lead and what you care about and what you will fund with government money by showing us what you will fund with your own. Would you show a better example of leadership than simply running as an opponent, but run as a servant and put your money where your mouth is? The second thing, great leaders are servant-hearted, but they are also willing to be held accountable. As we were in our series back in January, as we looked at Revelation and 2 Thessalonians, it describes leaders in power and authority who do whatever they want and are allowed to do whatever they want. They are not held accountable by anyone or anything. They literally let their impulses and their wild and their chaotic hearts run wild. And here's what I know and here's what you know. Leaders who are allowed to do whatever they want will eventually do whatever they want. Leaders who refuse accountability are the most dangerous people throughout human history. As we looked at above, bad leaders who know how to run good systems, these are people who accomplish really terrible things because they're ultimately, bad leaders do not view themselves as accountable to anyone. Great leaders are not just servant-hearted, but great leaders know they are accountable to someone and to something. Great leaders know that they are accountable. And I want to make a commitment on my behalf, but I want to make a commitment, and I hope that you would do this as well. That every single one of us would say, we will hold you accountable even if we voted for you. We will hold you accountable even if we voted for you. See, we all want to hold the other side accountable. To point a finger, oh, they did this, and oh, you see, I got to hold you accountable. We all want to hold the other side accountable and turn a blind eye to pretty much anything our side does. I refuse to do that for one moment longer. If the side that I vote for does something that violates people, that hurts people, that is not accountable to our Constitution and to the bylaws of our state, I'm going to call people out. I want to hold our government officials, not just the ones accountable, not just the ones that I voted against, but I want to hold accountable the ones that I voted for. And I think for some of us, we have gotten into such a polarized, divided place because we refuse to hold the people that we voted for accountable, but we want to hold everyone else accountable. And so we're constantly pointing our finger and pointing a finger and pointing a finger and pointing a finger at the other side while we never point the finger at our side. Let's make a commitment. We will hold our government officials accountable even if they're the ones that we voted for and that we put in office in the first place. So great leaders, they're servant-hearted, they're willing to be held accountable, and they're for the entire governed population. So here's what I would call for those who are running for election this year. Please Present your plan forward without demonizing those on the other side politically. Because here's the thing. You can do that and you can get elected, but once you're elected, you actually have to turn around and lead for everyone that you demonized while you were running. Stop demonizing while you're running because it makes actual governance more difficult. It makes your job as a leader more difficult when you have demonized half of the population that you are now called to govern and to lead. The other side of the aisle, let me just promise you something. The other side of the aisle is not to be feared and it is not to be conquered. It is to be lovingly and servant-heartedly led. That's what if you are running for office, that is your calling. You are called to lead everyone in your state, everyone in your district, everyone in the country, everyone in your school, everyone in your office. You are called to lead everyone. And you're called to lead for the good of everyone. The other side is not to be feared and is not to be beaten. They are to be served. I loved what Andy Stanley said. So again, this turned into an Andy message, I guess. But on March 15th, Andy Stanley, who pastors in the Atlanta area, was requested to come be the chaplain of the day at the Georgia legislature. And while he was there, he decided to stir some things up. He said, politically speaking, fear of the other party is an asset. Division makes it easy to demonize and mischaracterize the other folks. So unfortunately, where you sit, fear and demonization and disunity is to your advantage. But those of you who pander to and foster division are terrible leaders. If you need an enemy in order to lead, you're a poor leader. Just because somebody considers you their enemy, you do not have to return the favor. So to our political leaders, would you make a decision right here from this day forward that you will lead everyone in our state, everyone in our country, everyone who you are responsible for, and everyone that you represent, whether they voted for you or not, whether they would never vote for you or not, like whether they would vote for you 1,000,000 times out of 1,000,000 or whether they would never vote for you if their life depended on it. Would you stand for and would you serve and would you lead for the benefit of everyone that you represent, whether they would choose you or not? Let's stop. As Christians, again, I'm not telling everyone this, but if you're a Christian, I would hope that you would stop voting for leaders who run to the extremes because that's where the money and the outrage are. Let's vote for leaders who want to accomplish something by working together with people, even people who are different and who disagree with them. Let's start as Christians, as Jesus followers, because of what we've seen in our scriptures. Let's start electing people willing to serve, people who view themselves as accountable to someone and accountable to something, and people who are for everyone they represent. Let's vote for. In this election season, let's start now. Let's start from this moment forward. Let's start electing people we believe to be great leaders who will build and implement good systems of government. And I'm just telling you, if we do, I have a feeling, I have a hunch, this is the way forward. What might be possible? I think this is the way forward. I think this is the way we begin to move past division and the way we move past demonization. I think this is the way we move past polarization. I think this is the way we all meet in the middle. And the way we meet in the middle is the place where we decide how to move forward with the best interests of everyone involved in mind. This is the way forward, and it begins right here, right now, in your living room, in your office, in your den, on your back patio, in our churches, in our cities, in our small groups. It begins today, here in 2022. Let's pray a new way forward. Let's blaze a new path, and let's be a shining light for Jesus in our world this year. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for this incredible example in the story that's found in the life of Joseph and in the nation of Egypt. God, thank you for the example that is so clear of what happens when we have great leaders who are able to build great systems. God, thank you for the counterexample of what happens when poor leaders get a hold of a great system. God, I pray today that we would be wise enough, that we would have discernment in the area of our politics. God, in the area of who we will vote for, who we will cast our votes for. God, to vote for great leaders, to be able to discern who great leaders are of those who are asking for our votes. God, give us discernment to know who will build and implement great systems that ultimately help the most people. And God, would you ultimately help us to have the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to actually do it. God, in a world that's divided, in a world that wants to run to the polls, in a world that wants to run to extremes, God, would you give us the wisdom to know what to do? Give us the courage to actually do it. And God, as we do this, would you help us to also be part of the solution as we pave a new way forward, as we blaze a new path forward? Help us to be a part of the solution, not pointing fingers at what we think is the problem. Help us to be part of the solution as we move forward, to honor you, to love you, and to serve our world in your name. We love you, God, and we pray this in Jesus' strong name. Amen.
Let praise be a weapon that silences the enemy. Let praise be a weapon that conquers all anxiety. Let it rise. Let praise arise. Sing your name in the dark and it changes everything. We sing with all we are and we claim your victory. Let it rise. Let praise arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. We praise you. Faith is on that overcomes the raging sea. Faith is all that calms the storm inside of me. Let it rise. Let faith arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. We praise you. We praise you. We praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. the innocent judge guilty. While the guilty one was free, and death would be his portion, and our portion liberty. Our chains are gone, our debt is paid, the cross has overthrown the grave. For Jesus' blood that sets us free means death to death and life for me. I give my whole life to honor this love by the Lamb who was slain. I'm forgiven, the sinner's Savior, crown him forever. For the Lamb who was slain, he is risen. I give my whole life to honor this love by the Lamb who was slain. I'm forgiven, the sinner's Savior, crown him forever. For the Lamb who was slain, he is risen. I give my whole life to honor this love by the Lamb who was slain. I'm forgiven, the sinner's Savior, crown him forever. For the Lamb who was slain, he is risen. Our chains are gone, our debt is paid, the cross has overthrown the grave. For Jesus' blood that sets us free means death to death and life for me. Means death to death and life for me.
Well, it's been a great morning together here today. Hopefully you found it helpful and hopeful and encouraging and challenging. Hopefully you didn't find it infuriating, but if you found it infuriating, I'd love to hear from you by email. But today, we just want to let you know a few next steps that you can take here at the end of service to connect and engage with our church. First of all, we want to let you know how you can give if you want to give today. The methods of giving are on the screen right now. You can give online, you can give by our Cash App, you can give with a text, or you can send cash or check to the P.O. box that's on the screen right now. But however and whenever you give, I really do want to say thank you so much for your generosity, for your faithfulness and your obedience to God, and your continued support of our local church. Thank you for believing in our mission to help people take a first step and a next step in a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what we hope we do for you every Sunday. That's what we hope we do every week in person. We believe that we're helping people take their first and their next step in a relationship with Jesus Christ all the time. So thank you so much for your continued support and your continued generosity toward our church. We also want to let you know if you have a need today in any way, whether it be a financial need or any other kind of need, or if there's a physical need or a health need, we want to know how we can pray for you and how we might be able to partner with you. So we would love to hear from you. The ways that you can let us know are on screen right now, either by email, by phone, or by Facebook. You can let us know any of those ways, and we would love to hear from you so that we can know how we can pray for you, and we can maybe make a plan for how to partner with you in your need. And then finally, we want to let you know the ways that you can engage if you have kids in preschool or elementary school. Our Little Movers and our Movement Kids experiences are live every Sunday. That includes right now. They go live every Sunday at 10 a.m. and they're great ways to keep your kids engaged and growing in their relationship with Jesus while you're at home. And so we want to encourage you to check those out. My family loves them. We watch them every week, even though our kids are in person, and we just love to use them to reinforce what's going on in church and to keep them engaged throughout the week. So we'd love for you to check those out. Well, That's all we've got today. Next week, we begin a brand new series called Inflated, where we're going to spend a few weeks talking about what we do with our finances. In a time like now where inflation is higher than ever and money is tighter than ever, we believe there's an incredibly important message when it comes to finances, and there's incredible wisdom in God's word for our finances. So we'd love for you to tune in next week. Until next week, have a great weekend and have a great 4th of July holiday. We'll see you next weekend.